It happened on a freezing afternoon when retired soldier Jack Carter returned home earlier than anyone expected with his loyal German shepherd Rex trotting faithfully by his side. The snow was falling thick, painting the world in silence and white, and when he opened the gate of his small house, what he saw froze him harder than any winter ever could. His 5-year-old disabled daughter, Emily, standing barefoot in a tub of ice water, trembling, her fragile body shaking under the cruel voice of the woman who should have protected her. In that moment, the soldier in him disappeared, and only a father remained, a father whose heart was breaking in silence. What happened next would change everything. Stay with us until the end of this story to witness how love can warm even the coldest storm. And if you believe no child should ever face pain alone, hit subscribe and walk with us on these journeys of compassion and courage. May your day be gentle and your heart be kind. The noon sky over Ravenhill was the color of milk, heavy and still, as snow fell in slow, endless sheets over the small wooden houses lining the narrow street. The air carried a brittle hush, broken only by the creak of frozen branches and the distant hum of a snowplow crawling up the hill. Winter had settled into the bones of the town, the kind of cold that made every breath visible. Behind one of those houses, in a small yard fenced with peeling white boards, a child's thin voice trembled between the gusts of wind, so faint it might have been mistaken for the cry of a bird caught in the cold. Emily Carter was 6 years old, a fragile figure in a short beige polka-dot dress frayed at the edges. The dress looked as though it had belonged to a warmer season. Her arms were bare, skin pale against the harsh air, and the faint metallic gleam of her prosthetic leg caught the light as she tried to balance on the icy ground. Her face was small and heart-shaped, the kind of face made for smiles that had forgotten how to appear. When she spoke, her voice came softly, threaded with both fear and politeness, as if every word had to ask permission to exist. "Please, Mother, may I have new crutches? This one hurts when I walk." Vanessa, her stepmother, stood by the back door wrapped in a long gray cardigan. She was in her early 30s, tall, with smooth blonde hair twisted into a tight knot and lips that rarely bent toward kindness. Her beauty had a hardness to it, something sharp behind the eyes. She turned from the sink, the coffee cup in her hand still steaming, and looked at the child as though she were an inconvenience. "You think life is easy, don't you?" she said, her tone more weary than warm. "You just want people to pity you." The cup landed hard on the counter. "If you want to walk like everyone else, then learn to stand the cold first." Emily didn't understand. Before she could ask, Vanessa had already grabbed her small wrist and pulled her toward the yard. The woman's face was flushed from anger, or perhaps from something older than anger. Resentment, long-fed and quietly rotting. She opened the lid of a plastic tub filled with water left out overnight. Thin shards of ice floated inside. Without hesitation, she lifted the child and placed her into it, the water slapping against the sides as Emily gasped. "Stand up straight," Vanessa shouted over the wind. "If you want to be strong, this is how you learn." The cold bit through the child's skin like needles. She tried to lift her leg, but the prosthetic slipped against the slick bottom. Her breath came fast, short, and visible in the air like smoke. I'm sorry," she whispered, voice barely audible over the sound of her own trembling. For a moment, everything around them was quiet except for the soft fall of snow and the hollow sound of water shifting in the tub. Vanessa stood watching, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the small body, shaking in front of her. Somewhere in that stillness, a distant engine broke through, the low, steady hum of a vehicle approaching the gate. The sound was foreign in the quiet neighborhood, and Vanessa turned her head, distracted for a second. The Jeep stopped outside the house, tires crunching through the snow. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, in his early 40s, with a field jacket the color of olive moss and boots darkened by road dust and melted ice. His hair was dark brown, streaked with silver at the temples, his face lined with the kind of fatigue that comes from seeing too much and sleeping too little. Jack Carter had spent half his life learning discipline, silence, and duty, yet none of that had prepared him for what waited behind his own fence. At his side trotted Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black saddle across his back and tan fur on his chest and legs. The dog's amber eyes flicked between the gate and his master, alert and questioning. Jack reached the gate just as the wind carried the faintest sound of crying. He froze, his hand still on the latch, heart beating once, hard. Then he heard it again, a child's voice, small, breaking apart with each breath. Without thinking, he pushed the gate open. The scene that met him stopped the air in his lungs. His daughter, bare-armed, her hair damp with melting snow, standing in a tub of ice water, her prosthetic leg trembling beneath her, while Vanessa stood over her, yelling words that cut sharper than the wind. For a second, the world narrowed to that image. White snow, blue lips, a child too cold to cry. Then something primal rose inside him. Jack's voice thundered across the yard. "Emily!" The woman spun around, startled. The dog barked once, deep and fierce, his paws crunching into the snow as he lunged forward. Jack crossed the distance in seconds, lifting Emily out of the water with one arm and wrapping her against his chest beneath the folds of his jacket. The shock of her cold skin against his made him flinch. "My God," he muttered, his voice breaking. "She's freezing." Vanessa's expression shifted, her confidence cracking into guilt. "Jack, It wasn't what it looks like," she stammered, hands half raised. "She was just playing. I didn't mean—" Jack's gaze found hers, and in it burned the calm fury of a soldier who had seen cruelty dressed as order too many times before. "Playing?" he repeated quietly, every word precise, deliberate. "You call this a game?" His voice carried no need to shout. It was too controlled for that, but something in its stillness made Vanessa step back. Rex stood between them, fur bristling, a low growl vibrating through the silence. Jack turned to the child, pressing her closer. Emily's lips trembled, eyes half open, her voice a fragile whisper against his collar. "Dad, it's cold." He swallowed hard, his throat tightening around the words he wanted to say. "I know, sweetheart. I'm here now." His breath clouded in the air as he looked up again. "You're not touching her again," he said evenly, each syllable measured and final. "Ever." He didn't wait for a reply. Snow swirled as he strode toward the Jeep, Rex circling once before leaping into the back seat. Jack settled Emily into the passenger seat, wrapping her with his coat, checking her pulse with hands that shook more than he wanted them to. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the white haze. Vanessa stood at the gate, her figure shrinking behind a curtain of falling snow, her voice lost to the wind. On the road out of Ravenhill, the storm thickened, but inside the Jeep there was only the sound of Jack's steady breathing and the faint whimper of a child half asleep against his arm. Rex sat alert beside them, eyes forward, ears twitching at every passing sound. Jack glanced at the rearview mirror, the house fading behind, the gate swinging open and shut like a broken heartbeat. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "We're going to the hospital," he said softly, though she might not have heard. "And I swear to you, no one will ever hurt you again." The road ahead curved along the frozen river, glittering faintly under the pale sun. For the first time in months, Jack felt something stir inside him, not anger, not fear, but the weight of love so fierce it frightened him. As the Jeep disappeared into the white horizon, the world behind them grew quiet again, the wind erasing every footprint from the yard, as if winter itself was trying to hide what had been done there. Snow had already softened into slush by the time Jack carried Emily through the sliding doors of Ravenhill General Hospital. The scent of antiseptic filled the corridor, sharp and cold, and the fluorescent lights hummed faintly above, washing the world in pale blue. Nurses moved quickly between rooms, voices hushed, the kind of quiet that belonged to places where pain and hope shared the same ceiling. Jack's boots left a trail of melting snow behind him, his jacket heavy with water, his arms still locked protectively around the small body that barely stirred against his chest. Rex followed close, his fur dripping, paws silent on the tiled floor, eyes fixed on Emily as if his own breath depended on hers. Dr. Clara Monroe met them halfway down the corridor. She was in her late 60s, her silver hair cropped short beneath a light blue cap, and her face bore the calm strength of someone who had seen life at its most fragile. Her eyes, a soft gray, studied the man and child before her with immediate understanding. Without questions, she motioned to a nearby room. "This way," she said quietly. Inside, the room was warm, lit by a single lamp near the bed. Jack laid Emily down, his hands reluctant to let go even for a second. Clara's fingers, though aged, moved with precision, checking pulse, skin temperature, the faint discolorations along the child's arms and legs. "Severe hypothermia," she murmured, almost to herself, "and these bruises, they're not from today." Jack sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed, the sound of it scraping faintly against the floor. The warmth of the room did little to thaw the storm inside him. He stared at his daughter's face, lips pale, lashes trembling faintly, one small hand resting motionless atop the blanket. For a man who had seen war, who had carried brothers out of fire and rubble, this moment cut deeper than any battlefield. The wounds of others had always been things he could mend with strength, orders, or prayer. But this was his own child, broken by cruelty he had not been there to stop. He reached out, enclosing her hand between his palms. It was cold, impossibly cold, and the chill climbed through his veins like guilt-made flesh. Clara returned after a moment, her clipboard pressed against her chest. Her voice, though gentle, carried gravity. "She's stable now," she said, "but the bruises show repeated trauma, weeks, maybe months. Someone hurt her often, Mr. Carter." Jack looked up slowly, his eyes darkened by disbelief that had already curdled into rage. The doctor didn't look away. "We'll document everything," she added, "but she needs peace, not anger right now." He nodded faintly, though his jaw was set, the muscle there, twitching, as if each breath demanded restraint. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, thick with something unspoken. Rex lay near the foot of the bed, chin resting on his paws. The dog's amber eyes followed every movement, unblinking. At one point, when Emily stirred, Rex lifted his head and gave a low, rumbling whine, as though reminding her that she was not alone. Jack reached down and brushed his fur absently, grounding himself in that living warmth. For a while, the only sound was the steady rhythm of the heart monitor and the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching into eternity. Then, the door creaked open. The sharp scent of perfume drifted in before the voice did. "Jack," Vanessa said softly, as though the word could erase what she'd done. She stood in the doorway, her hair damp from melting snow, her coat pulled tight. Her eyes darted toward the bed, then quickly away. "I came as soon as I heard," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to." The sentence never finished. Jack rose, slow and deliberate. The expression on his face made even the sterile light seem to shrink. "You should leave," he said simply. Vanessa blinked, her mouth parting in disbelief. "Jack, please, I was only trying to—" He cut her off, his voice still quiet but trembling under its own control. "A child needs love," he said, "not lessons taught with ice." The words landed heavier than any shout could have. Vanessa's eyes filled, not with remorse, but with fear, the kind that blooms when power slips from the hand that abused it. Without another word, she turned and left. When the door closed behind her, the air seemed cleaner. Jack sat again, shoulders slumped, his hand returning to Emily's. The color in her face had begun to return slightly, faint warmth beneath her skin, but her breathing was still shallow. A nurse entered, a young woman named Megan, her cheeks pink from the cold, her voice gentle but steady. "Mr. Carter," she said, holding a small device. "We found this on her wrist. It's a children's smartwatch. Seems she tried to send a message before you arrived." She tapped the screen. The message glowed faintly, unsent but saved. "Mom hit me. I'm scared." Jack stared at the words. They seemed too small, too innocent to carry so much pain. His eyes lingered on the blinking cursor at the end of the unfinished sentence, a fragment of fear frozen in time. He exhaled slowly, the sound closer to a growl than a sigh. "Thank you," he murmured, and the nurse nodded before slipping out, leaving him alone again. The room grew quieter still. Snow pressed softly against the window pane, blurring the world outside into a white haze. He rose and walked to the window, his reflection faint in the glass, a soldier's posture still intact but the weight behind his shoulders heavier than armor. Outside, the courtyard was empty except for the faint footprints of nurses crossing between wings, already filling with snow. He thought of the years he'd spent away, of letters unanswered, of birthdays missed, and the silence he had mistaken for peace. His breath fogged the glass. If justice doesn't come for her, he said quietly, almost to himself. Then I'll bring it home myself. Behind him, Rex shifted, ears twitching at the tone in his master's voice. Emily stirred faintly in her sleep, the smallest sound escaping her lips. A sigh or a dream, it was hard to tell. Jack turned back, his face softening. He moved to the bed, resting his hand gently on her blanket. Rest, sweetheart, he whispered. No one's going to hurt you again. His voice caught at the last word. He sat beside her until the gray light outside deepened into the muted amber of evening, shadows folding gently across the floor. In the hallway beyond, the hospital hummed with quiet life, wheels rolling, pages turning, doors closing softly. But inside that room, time seemed to hold its breath. The snow continued to fall, indifferent and endless, while a father watched over his daughter and a dog kept silent vigil at their feet. Somewhere deep in Jack's chest, beneath the ache and exhaustion, a resolve began to form, steady, cold, and certain as the winter outside. He had seen too much of the world's cruelty to let it reach her again. Morning came slow over Ravenhill, pale and silent, the kind of morning that pretends peace after a storm. Jack stood by the hospital window, the world outside wrapped in frost, every rooftop glazed with light like the town itself was holding its breath. Emily slept soundly for the first time in days, her small chest rising beneath layers of blankets. Rex lay at the foot of her bed, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert even in rest. The soft rhythm of the child's breathing was the only thing that calmed the restlessness in him. Yet beneath that fragile stillness, Jack's mind had already moved beyond the walls of the hospital. There were questions buried under the snow, answers that smelled of betrayal. He knew the scars on Emily's body were not the only wounds that needed healing. He left quietly after sunrise, leaving a note for the nurse and one last look at his daughter's pale face. The streets were still empty when he reached the town square. Snow crunched beneath his boots, the sound too sharp for the morning hush. The sheriff's station sat at the corner of Main and Elm, its brick walls dusted white, the flag hanging stiff in the wind. Jack stepped inside, warmth rushing over him, mingled with the faint smell of burnt coffee and paper. Behind the front desk sat Deputy Mason Cole, a man in his late 30s with a square jaw, close-cropped dark hair, and the weary steadiness of someone who had seen too much but still believed in the good of things. Mason looked up, and a slow, knowing smile crossed his face. "Jack Carter," he said, standing to shake his hand. "Didn't think I'd see you back here so soon." Their handshake held years of unspoken memory, sandstorms, gunfire, the kind of loyalty forged where death once slept close. Mason's blue eyes sharpened when he saw the tension in Jack's shoulders. "What happened?" he asked. Jack didn't answer right away. He just pulled a folded photo from his jacket, Emily's hospital wristband and the faint bruises visible above it. Mason's jaw clenched. "Christ," he muttered. Jack's voice came quiet but deliberate. "I need your help. Something's not right. Not just what she did to Emily. I think there's more beneath it. Property, maybe money. I can feel it." Mason nodded once. "Then let's dig." That afternoon, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the tracks of the world. Jack drove back toward his home with Rex in the passenger seat. The house stood still and cold, the windows dark, the yard frozen into silence. He parked at a distance, careful not to draw attention. Rex jumped out, nose immediately to the wind, his body tense with purpose. "Find it," Jack murmured, voice low, and the dog began to move, circling the house, nostrils flaring as he followed scents invisible to human sense. The world was muted, except for the crunch of paws in snow and the occasional rattle of branches. Behind the barn, where the old chicken coop leaned half-collapsed, Rex stopped. His tail stiffened, ears erect. Jack followed, brushing aside a layer of frost from the wooden planks. Rex pawed at the ground, then at a loose board near the corner. Beneath it, wrapped in a torn paper bag, lay something that didn't belong to the dirt. A bundle of documents, the edges warped from damp but still intact. Jack crouched, gloved hands careful as he opened the bag. Inside were legal papers stamped with signatures and dates. His breath caught as he read the name printed across the top. Merritt Hall. He knew that name. A real estate magnate from 2 counties over, a man with a reputation slicker than the ice on the roads. Deals that smelled clean but always left ruin behind. The signature of Vanessa Hall Carter rested just beneath it. The letters looked deliberate, practiced. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He folded the papers, tucking them into his jacket, and gave Rex a firm pat. "Good work, boy," he whispered. Rex wagged his tail once, the fur along his neck still bristling, as if he too understood the gravity of what they had found. Back in the truck, Jack spread the documents across the dashboard. Beneath the property transfers were letters. One in particular caught his eye, written in Vanessa's looping script. "Once he's gone for good, the land and assets revert under my name. Hall will finalize the deed." By the time Jack reached Mason's office again, night had already settled over Ravenhill, the town's lights flickering beneath a thin mist. Mason sat at his desk, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the glow of the computer screen pale against his face. "You were right," he said, glancing up as Jack entered. "Hall's been flagged before for fraudulent transfers. Vanessa's name showed up in one of his pending deeds 3 months ago." Jack leaned on the desk, his expression unreadable. "They used me," he said flatly, "while I was overseas." Mason nodded grimly. "They did more than that. They tried to erase you from your own life." He turned the monitor toward Jack. A database of transactions, Hall's name repeated across multiple counties, the same signature pattern, the same quiet theft. Mason printed the files, sliding them across the desk. "This is enough to start an inquiry," he said, "but we'll need direct evidence, something tying her voice to the deal." Jack's gaze drifted to the phone lying between them. "Then I'll get it." He stood, slipping on his gloves again. "She talks too much when she thinks she's won." Mason looked at him, a mix of concern and respect shadowing his expression. "Be careful, Jack. You've already been through hell. Don't go back there." Jack's answer came quiet but firm. "I'm already there." Later that evening, under a sky thick with falling snow, Jack parked a few blocks from Vanessa's rental house. The lights inside glowed faintly behind the curtains. He sat in silence, recording device ready, breath steady. Rex rested his head on Jack's knee, amber eyes glinting in the dim light. The phone rang twice before Vanessa answered. Her voice came bright, almost cheerful, like someone who had already forgotten the cruelty of her own hands. Jack kept his tone calm. "I heard Hall stop by last week," he said casually. A pause, then her laugh, sharp and brittle. "He did. The deal's almost done. When that soldier finally comes home, everything he thought was his will already be mine." The words came out like venom wrapped in silk. Jack ended the call slowly, letting the silence after it settle heavy in the truck. The recorder blinked red, evidence, simple and undeniable. He sat there for a long moment, staring through the windshield as flakes gathered on the glass. The world outside blurred into white, but the truth had never felt clearer. Vanessa's betrayal was not just an act of cruelty. It was a theft of everything he had built, everything his daughter was meant to inherit. Rex gave a low growl, sensing the shift in his master's breathing. Jack reached out, scratching behind the dog's ear. "We've got what we need," he murmured. "Now we finish this right." The drive back to town was slow, headlights slicing through sheets of snow. Jack stopped once along the ridge overlooking the frozen river. The water beneath the ice was still moving, unseen but alive. He stood there for a moment, listening to the faint creak of the frozen surface. Betrayal, he thought, was much the same, silent until it broke. When he climbed back into the truck, his eyes were steady, his voice low. "They took my name, my home, and they hurt my child," he said softly. "That ends now." The storm arrived before dawn, sweeping across the valley like a wall of white fire. Roads vanished beneath the snow, fences disappeared into the blur, and the trees bowed low under the weight of ice. Inside the small police outpost near Ravenhill Ridge, the phone rang once, sharp, urgent, and Mason Cole's voice grew tight as he listened. The hospital nurse on the line was trembling. Her words came in gasps. Emily Carter was gone. Her bed empty, the window ajar, and fresh tire tracks already fading beneath the falling snow. By the time Mason called Jack, the storm had already swallowed the first mile. Jack said nothing for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, but there was something in it that made even the wind seem to pause. "She took her," he said. "I'm going after them." Minutes later, the sound of an engine tore through the blizzard. Jack's old Jeep struggled against the drifts, tires clawing at the frozen road. Beside him, Rex stood braced against the dashboard, his breath fogging the glass, ears twitching toward the wind. The storm howled like a living thing, beating against the windshield in frantic bursts. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his mind a single thread of focus. Find Emily. The thought repeated with every turn, every lurch of the tires. He reached for the wool scarf that had been left on the passenger seat, a small pink one, frayed at the edges, still carrying the faint scent of lavender. Emily's. He held it out for Rex. "Find her," he murmured. The dog's nostrils flared once, then again, a low rumble building in his chest. He had the scent. They followed the narrow county road that cut toward the mountains, the snow thickening until it was hard to tell where the earth ended and the sky began. The Jeep's headlights struggled to carve space in the white blur, illuminating only fragments of the storm, branches whipping, drifts collapsing, the ghostly shape of telephone poles bending in the wind. Rex growled low, nose pressed to the glass, then barked once, sharp and sure. Jack leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Through the swirl of snow, faint tire tracks curved off the main road toward the forest line. He steered after them, wheels sliding, heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was driving blind, desperate, and Emily, his little girl, was in that car. By the time he reached the foothills, the storm had grown feral. Snow whipped sideways, stinging his face even through the half-open window. He could barely see beyond the hood, yet the tracks ahead were clear enough for now. "Hold on," he muttered, as if Emily could hear him through the wind. Rex barked once, head snapping toward the right where the forest thickened. Through the blur, the faint shape of a dark vehicle appeared, its hazard lights blinking weakly beneath a skin of ice. Jack slammed the brakes. The Jeep skidded sideways, stopping a few yards short. The other car was stuck deep in a snowbank, its back wheels spinning helplessly. The driver's door swung open. Vanessa stumbled out, her hair plastered to her face, one gloved hand clutching a pistol, the other dragging Emily by the arm. Emily's cry was faint, carried away by the wind. Her coat hung loose, her small body trembling. Jack stepped into the storm, boots sinking into the drift, voice steady despite the chaos. "Let her go, Vanessa." She turned sharply, her eyes wild beneath the frost. "Stay back," she screamed. "You don't get to take anything from me. Not her, not the house, not my life." The barrel of the gun wavered, glinting in the gray light. Jack took another step forward, his breath clouding between them. "It's over," he said quietly. "You've done enough." Her laughter broke into a sob. "If you come closer, I'll shoot." The world seemed to hold still, the storm itself waiting. Jack's pulse slowed. He could see Emily's face, eyes wide, lips blue, fingers clutching at the sleeve of her coat. He moved once, quick and deliberate, closing the distance before thought could catch up. The gun fired, the sound a hollow crack swallowed by the wind. Pain seared across his shoulder as the bullet grazed him, spinning him halfway around. Rex leapt from behind him in the same heartbeat, muscles coiled, a blur of black and tan against the snow. The impact knocked Vanessa backward, the gun clattering from her hand. She fell into the drift with a cry. Rex standing over her, teeth bared, a growl deep and primal echoing across the ridge. Jack stumbled but caught himself, clutching his arm. The blood was warm against the cold air, seeping through his jacket. He dropped to his knees beside Emily, who clung to him with a sound that broke something deep inside. "It's all right," he whispered, gathering her close. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I'm here." She buried her face against his chest, her small hands shaking as he pulled his coat around her. Behind them, Rex barked once as if calling for help. In the distance, faint but growing, came the wail of sirens threading through the wind. Mason was coming. The flashing red lights cut through the storm minutes later, painting the snow in pulses of color. Mason and two officers moved quickly, their figures blurred by the white. "Jack!" Mason shouted, rushing forward. He knelt beside him, eyes darting from the blood on Jack's arm to the child trembling in his lap. "She's all right," Jack said hoarsely. "She's all right now." The other officers pulled Vanessa to her feet, her face streaked with tears and melting snow. She no longer resisted. The fight had drained from her, replaced by the hollow stare of someone who finally saw the ruin she'd made. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the sound swallowed by the wind. Mason helped Jack to his feet, steadying him. "You need a medic," he said, but Jack shook his head. "She does. First." He nodded toward Emily. The little girl clung tighter, unwilling to let go. Mason's expression softened. He pulled a thermal blanket from his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You did good, Jack," he said quietly. "You got her back." Jack didn't answer. He only looked down at his daughter, brushing the snow from her hair, his breath trembling between exhaustion and relief. As the sirens dimmed and the storm began to ease, the world around them seemed to exhale. The mountains loomed quiet and endless, their peaks fading into the gray sky. Rex sat beside Jack, tail curled, eyes fixed on the horizon. The cut on Jack's shoulder stung, but he barely felt it. Emily's small hand gripped his sleeve, her warmth seeping through the cold. For the first time in months, maybe years, he allowed himself to breathe. "I'm here now," he whispered against her hair. "You're safe." His blood darkened the snow beneath them, but it didn't matter. The fight, the storm, the pain, all of it had led to this: a father, his child, and the loyal dog who never stopped running through the cold to bring them together again. The rescue team loaded Vanessa into a cruiser, the red lights flashing against her pale face. Mason lingered a moment longer, watching as Jack lifted Emily into his arms and began the slow walk toward the ambulance. The snow fell softer now, flakes catching in his hair, melting against the heat of his skin. The sound of Rex's paws followed close behind, steady and loyal as ever. When they reached the edge of the road, Jack turned once more toward the mountains. The white expanse stretched endlessly, but for the first time it no longer looked cruel. It looked clean. Inside the ambulance, warmth returned in waves. Emily's head rested against Jack's shoulder, her breathing even. Rex lay at their feet, his eyes heavy but alert. Mason closed the door gently, his voice muffled through the glass. "Let's get them home." As the vehicle pulled away, the storm began to fade behind them, leaving only the whisper of snow across the highway, a sound like forgiveness. The snow had begun to melt, leaving silver puddles glinting in the morning light, and the town of Ravenhill was finally exhaling after a winter that had taken too much from everyone. The hospital stood quiet at the edge of the hill, its windows fogged with the breath of spring struggling to return. Inside one of the recovery rooms, Jack Carter sat by the window with his right arm bound in a sling. The surgery had gone well, the bullet had missed the bone, but the months of wear, the years of carrying both duty and grief, had left deeper marks. His shoulder ached less now, though some nights it still burned when the wind rose. He had learned not to mind it. Pain, to him, was just another kind of reminder. Proof that he was still here, still capable of feeling, still fighting for the small heartbeat that slept in the next bed over. Emily lay under a thin blanket, sunlight sliding gently across her hair. The bruises had faded, replaced by the soft pink of healing skin. The doctor said her recovery would take time, but she had already begun surprising them. Each morning she pushed herself to sit up a little longer, to stretch a little further, her small hands gripping the rails with quiet determination. She didn't cry anymore when she walked on her prosthetic. Instead, she gritted her teeth, took one breath, then another, as though stubbornness itself could warm her. When Jack smiled at her, she only looked back and said, "I'm getting stronger, Daddy." And he believed her. Deputy Mason Cole visited that week, carrying a cardboard box wrapped in brown paper. He was out of uniform for once. Flannel shirt, dark jeans, the easy warmth of someone who'd finally had a full night's sleep. He set the box on the bed and cleared his throat awkwardly. "Figured she could use these," he said, glancing at Emily. She tore through the paper with small, eager hands and gasped. Inside lay a pair of new crutches, sleek aluminum, polished and bright, each handle wrapped in soft leather dyed a pale blue. "They're light," Mason said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Custom made. Thought the color might match her courage." Emily's laughter filled the room, bright and unguarded. "Thank you, Mr. Mason," she whispered, hugging one crutch to her chest like a gift from another world. When she tried them the next morning, the halls of the hospital came alive with the sound of quiet taps on the tile floor, measured, careful, and proud. Jack walked behind her, his good arm ready to catch her if she fell, though she never did. Rex padded alongside, head tilted, tail sweeping low, his pace perfectly matched to hers. The nurses stopped to watch, their smiles soft and unspoken. Every few steps, Emily would pause, reach down to pat Rex's head, then move forward again, sunlight tracing her small figure as she passed. In that simple rhythm of movement, mettle, breath, and faith, the world seemed to right itself just a little. Outside, the town had moved on in quiet ways. Merritt Hall's arrest had made the papers, his photograph printed beneath the headline, "Real estate tycoon charged with fraud and conspiracy." He looked smaller in the picture, his perfect hair disheveled, his pride folded into a scowl. Vanessa's trial followed soon after. The courtroom had smelled faintly of dust and cold coffee, her face pale beneath the harsh lights. When the verdict came, guilty of child abuse and property fraud, Jack wasn't there. He didn't need to be. Justice, he had learned, didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered in small victories, a door closing, a child smiling again, the sound of peace returning where it had been lost. Weeks passed. Jack signed his retirement papers from the department he had served for 2 decades. There was no ceremony, no folded flag, just a quiet signature and a sense of release. He bought a small wooden house on the outskirts of town, the kind with creaking floors and a porch that faced the sunrise. It wasn't much, but it had warmth. And more importantly, it had space for a child to grow and a dog to run. On the first morning they moved in, Emily ran her fingers over the window glass and whispered, "It looks like home." Rex barked once as if to agree. Jack stood behind her, his arm still stiff from surgery, and thought it was the truest thing he'd heard in years. Life settled into gentler rhythms. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and the sound of Rex's paws pacing across the floorboards. Emily's laughter filled the small rooms like birdsong. Sometimes Mason dropped by with groceries or news from the station, staying just long enough to share a story and a smile. The past still lingered, but it no longer haunted. It had become a backdrop to something better, quieter. Jack spent hours teaching Emily how to read the world the way he once read maps, by noticing the small things, the wind, the color of the light, the way a dog's ears twitched before a storm. She listened closely, storing every word as if they were treasures. On the final morning of winter, the air held that rare stillness that comes before spring's first thaw. The yard behind their home was covered in a thin crust of snow that sparkled under the pale sun. Emily stood at the center of it, wearing her blue coat and wool hat, the new crutches gleaming in her hands. Jack leaned against the porch railing, one shoulder bandaged beneath his jacket, his face softened by pride. Rex darted in circles around the girl, barking joyfully, the white powder flying beneath his paws. Emily took a breath and stepped forward, her movements sure and graceful now, each stride marking the end of something cold and the start of something alive. "Look, Daddy," she called, her cheeks flushed with the bite of the air. "I can do it by myself." Jack smiled, his eyes wet but shining. "I know, sweetheart," he said softly, "but I'll always be right behind you." She turned, her grin wide and fearless, and for a moment the sunlight caught in her hair, making her glow against the snow. Rex bounded past her, skidding to a stop and shaking frost from his coat. Emily laughed until her voice echoed across the empty hills. The scene unfolded like a memory meant to last, a father watching his daughter stand tall again, a loyal dog guarding them both, and the world, at last, beginning to heal. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and thawing earth, the promise of another season. Jack took a slow breath, the pain in his shoulder easing as he exhaled. The war inside him had gone quiet. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun rose gold over Ravenhill, and whispered to no one in particular, "We made it." The snow melted around their feet, trickling into the soil, feeding the grass that would soon return. And there, in that small, forgotten town, 3 souls stood together, man, child, and dog, no longer survivors of winter, but witnesses of spring. They had crossed through darkness, through fear and loss, and found light waiting on the other side. The storm had passed, and what remained was something rare and simple, love that endured, faith that healed, and the quiet strength to begin again. Sometimes, the quietest acts carry the deepest meaning. Not the grand gestures, not the noise, but the quiet hands that hold on when the world turns cold. Somewhere out there, a father still waits by a hospital bed, a child still believes in kindness, and a loyal dog still keeps watch beneath the falling snow. The world is full of people like them, silent hearts who give, protect, and love without asking for anything in return. Their stories rarely make the headlines, but they shape the world in ways no one can measure. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who still believes in goodness. Leave a thought in the comments below, because sometimes your words might be the light someone else needs. And if you wish, stay with us. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage, compassion, and the grace that still walks among us. May God bless you and keep your heart gentle wherever you are tonight.